All right, so we're back. We're going about OOP in JavaScript using class there. And if you remember last time, we worked on this our objects where we define party method and setter at this keyword. Now imagine that this object that we have here want create the same object for another user. Just like what I have down here, where we are changing the name Faatihat to Kayode to Michael here. But we are changing this particular user, not creating and need another user which have the same structure of this particular one here. What we have to do is to do copy and paste and we change the data. And I imagine that something here now change from the first one. And since they have to share the same copy, what do we have to do? That one too. Right. But that's a bad practice because imagine that you now have like 10 users or you have like 20 users. You are going to start copying the objects one by one or everything here 10 times or 20 times on the number of users you want based on this structure. That's where this class comes in, and that class is what you can use to create a blueprint for your object. And what do I mean by that? So we know that every user that we're going to have in the system, they're going to have first name, last name will be there, language will be there, level will be there. And at the same time, they are going to have this other method here. So, what do you say? Okay, I'm coming. Let me pause. Let me resume back. Yeah. So what we need to do now is to create a blueprint where we can generate different objects that needs to follow that particular blueprint. And how do we do it? Every language always have this class, even though the way you work with them is quite different. But in JavaScript, to create a blueprint or to create a class is just by using this class keyword and followed by the name of the blueprint that you want to generate. For example, here now, our own is the user. We want to name it as user. And by convention, it's not a must that you do it like this. All class always start with capital letter. So all class always start with capital letter. And anytime you see anything in JavaScript that start with capital letter, by default you should think that that thing is a class. But that's the reason why we are naming it like that. If you like, it's something you can type small letter and you use it to create your class. But this is a bad practice because um, the user of this particular class might not even know what is going on with it unless they kind of go on top of it. That's when you need to tell them that this thing is kind of like a class. By convention, anytime you are creating your class, the name that you are using for your class start with capital letter. That's just the convention. Use small letter, it will work, but for convention's sake, you should always name your class in this form, which is what we call the camel case, if the other words are there. But for example, like user account, U is capitalized and the A is capitalized. So this naming convention is what we call camel case. So we have different naming convention there. So this one is called camel case. There like so. When you are creating a class, when you want to create your blueprint, you have the keyword class, then followed by whatever name that you want to use for your class. So this is one way of creating a class. And everything in JavaScript are just value. You can assign a function to a variable. Where we did something like this, const f is going to be whatever function that you want to create here, like that. The same thing too, you can do it for class too. But this pattern is what you always see every time there. You can actually assign your class to a variable too. You want to do it like that. First thing people using this pattern. something. So you can either create your class in this way or you create it like this. Class too can be assigned to a variable like that. I won't be using this method because this is the method you only see to use here. Always go with what other people are doing because you're not creating the code for yourself alone. You will be interacting with other developers later on. And when you are doing something apart from what people are used to, start looking strange. People, you can create your class like this or in this way. And inside this your class, that's where you are going to supply all the necessary stuff or all the variables and the methods that you want, all the objects that you are going to be creating out of this class later on. For example, here now, the user that we have at the top here, what are the properties or that we have there? So we have this first name, we have this last name, we have these languages, and we have this level there. And this is what we call the member variables. When you are dealing with class now, call it member variable or you can call it feed. So you can call it feed or you can call it member variable here like so, or you can even call it properties too. Or when you are dealing with class, the name you only see people use here is either this feed or this member variables. But you know, inside the object, what we call it is just these properties. So we have properties. When you're dealing with class, we call them feed or this member variable or the property. You want to call them their name. But how do you create a property? How do you create a property? So you can create a property through this is the number one way, which is the legacy way, the old way of doing it, but I'm going to show you the new way there too. So to create property in your class, so we have a special method that you always have. Even if you don't define it, JavaScript is going to create it for you. And that special function or the method is what we call this constructor here. So we have a special function or method that you always have in your class. And this special function, its responsibility is there is to create objects out of whatever the definition of your class. So we use this constructor later on, which is a function that is going to generate all the necessary properties and methods that you define in your class for a particular object that you want to create outside of that class. So we have this blueprint, and when we want to create the object later on, we need to call this class to generate the object for us out of this blueprint. And what this class going to use to create all this necessary stuff that you need from it, it uses this function or this method that we call constructor here. So anytime you define a class, this is how it's going to be. And anytime you want to create objects out of that class, for example, I'm going to have this user1, and in order for you to create the object out of that class, you are going to use this new keyword. So anywhere you see new keyword, whatever beside it, just know that it's a class. So you are trying to create a new object out of that blueprint or the class there. So whether I say blueprint or class, I'm referring to the same thing. So here now, what do you need to do? You need to call the class where you want to generate the object from. And in front of it here, as you can see, I'm calling it like a function. And what we have here is what we call constructor here. So we call it constructor, as you can see here. It's known as constructor. Even if you don't define it, JavaScript is going to create one for you out of the box there. And what is it going to do? What it's going to do is that it's going to generate a class based on the blueprint that you have here. Currently, I don't have anything there. It will just generate empty object for me because I've not defined anything inside this class. And by default, you always get what we call the default constructor, which is something you can do yourself later on. And out of this class now, we've generated this object. And if I want, I can keep generating more objects. Each one of them, they are taking this blueprint, but they are different. This is user one. Even though the two of them will have the same property, but they are different. So this one will generate its own, and this one too will have its own, but they have the same structure, but the data will not be the same thing. So whatever you are doing with user one will not affect whatever you are doing with user two, even though they are coming from the same class. So what this constructor is going to do is that it will generate a new object based on the structure that you specify here, and it will assign that object to this user one. Again, too, on this line 53, it will create another object separately from this first one, and it will assign it to this user 2. For the two of them, they are using the structure that we are going to find inside this class. And what we have here is what we call constructor. This is the class and this is the constructor. And just like the name, it's going to construct the object, and whatever the object you are getting back, it will assign it to this your variable here. And you can do all the necessary magic that you want to do there. And by default, we have this default constructor. Even though you define your class like this, there is a constructor inside it that the JavaScript is going to create for you out of the box if you don't create your own. But how do we create our own constructor? How do we create our own constructor? And don't forget, we use constructor to initialize some member variable, which is the property. So whether I call it feed or member variable or property, they are the same. There like that. So whether I mention method or function, I'm talking about the same thing there too. So inside this our class, anytime we want to create a new object out of it, we want to set some property. For example, here, this user, I want to set his username. Maybe here, for this first user, I want the name to be Faatihat. And for the second user, I want the name to be Rasta, like this. So how do I send this data down to this class? So how is this class going to know where to put this data? Because now, if you look at the top, under our user, we have first name, we have last name, we have language, and we have this level. So, and anytime we are creating objects out of this class, we want to set this value for all this property. But where are we going to set all this property, or where are we going to initialize this property anytime we are creating the new object from that class? So you do it from the constructor. That's one way of doing it there. And how do you do it? So to create a constructor, because constructor will always be called. Anytime you are initializing objects from your class, the constructor will always be called. And how are you now defining constructor in your class? So to create a constructor in JavaScript, we have this special keyword for this special function here. So this is a constructor and it's a special function, and you have to name it like this. So this is a special function that is going to get called anytime you are creating or instantiating. That's another word that we normally use it. So you are creating here, or you are instantiating your object like that. So when you are creating your object, or you want to create an instance of a class. So let me put this to create an instance of a class. It's the same thing. And what does that mean? It means out of this class here, you are creating objects from it. So that's what we call creating, or you are creating an instance of a class. And that instance is the object that will be returned back by this constructor. And this constructor is going to create the new object, and that object will be assigned to whatever variable that you put on the left of it there, like that. But now that we've had our own constructor here, JavaScript is not going to use the default one again. It's going to use whatever constructor that you define. You don't define any constructor to generate its own, which is the default one, because this is the constructor and it needs to call the function. But now you did not define it, and since you don't define it, JavaScript is going to create one out of the box, which is going to be this empty constructor here. And that empty constructor is going to generate the necessary object that it needs to do, and it will return it back to whoever is instantiating that instance from the class. So here, to have your own custom constructor, you are going to call, or you are going to define this function here, and the name must always be this like this. You can place it anywhere in the class, or by convention you always see it at the top, and every other thing follow it. Every other method will follow this one, but you can put it anywhere on the inside your class. As long as it is in between this open and the curly brace, it will work. But by convention, you always see it at the top before every other method in the class. And now we can do anything we want inside this constructor anytime we are calling this. So anytime you do something like this with the class, this is the stuff it's going to call for you. So this is this function you are calling here, because behind the scene, a class is just a function. Because you can actually do this thing too with function, but that's old way. This is a modern way of working with OOP. So in JavaScript, you can actually use function to do the same thing, and it will still work. But this is the modern way of doing it. And when you call this your class here, or when you instantiate an object from the class, what you're actually doing is that you are calling this constructor. Whatever you want it to happen, anytime this thing is constructing the object that will be returned back to this particular variable here, you can perform all these actions. So every action that you know you want to do anytime they are creating object, or when they are instantiating of a, when they are creating an instance from a class, you put them inside this constructor. For example, here now, what I want to do, what I just want to do is calling a constructor like this. So this thing will always get called anytime we are creating a new instance from the class there. That's the only time it will get called. So if I don't do anything with this class, nothing will happen, because the only thing we are doing here is the blueprint. Just like the function, when you define them, they don't do anything until you call them. The same thing too, when you define a class, you are just creating the blueprint. Nothing will happen yet. JavaScript will not create anything, but it knows about it, but it's not going to create any object yet. In order for you to have objects out of this class, then you need to do what we have on this line 54, which is what is going to use to instantiate us to create objects from the blueprint or the class that you define are there like that. So now, once you call this stuff, this one in turn will go into the class and call this your constructor. Whatever you are doing there is going to carry out the action. And once this thing is saved now, as you can see, it's going to call our constructor. So whatever you want to do anytime you're instantiating an object from a class, whatever you want to do the first time that thing is being called, then you can put them inside this constructor. Now, from this class, we have objects, and that object, we have all the structure that we put inside our class. And what are the other necessary stuff that we want to put inside this class? What we want to put here is to be able to get our full name here. So let me just borrow this method that we have inside object, because the way you work with object, that's the same way you'll be working with class. Just a little difference there, but it's still the same way, because that defining a blueprint that you can use later on are there. So here we don't need this comma here, because we are dealing with class, not object. But it's still the same way that you define your method in the object there. That's the same way you'll be doing it in the class. So right now, so we have this class. Inside the class, we have this special method, which is a constructor that will only get called the first time you are creating the object. That's the only time this one will get called. After that time, nothing to do with this constructor again. But inside this your class, you have some other functionality like this method. And what do we want to do here? As you can see, this get full name is telling us that anytime we create object from this class, we are going to have something like first name inside it, and we're going to have something like last name. But now, coming down here and call this user1 and dot get full name. If I call this one now, we're not going to get what we are expecting there, because we've not defined the necessary stuff that needs to be there. So I'm returning it, I'm not printing it out. So let me just print out the stuff. I console log out the value. Let me remove this here. So as you can see now, my full name from function is undefined and undefined. Why are they undefined? It's because we've not worked with this first name and last name inside this user there. So it doesn't know about them. But if you look at it, I'm sending Faatihat to it. Let me send the other name to it too. For example, here, I want to send the other name, because you can send any parameter that you want into it like this. So now, I'm sending this first name and this last name to the constructor. But after printing out the value of full name, we are still getting this undefined. Why? It's because everything that we are passing to this constructor here, we are not using it at all in the class. So if you want to receive everything that the user will be sending to your constructor anytime they are creating objects out of that class, then you are going to define them here inside the constructor, and you can do anything you want with them. For example, here now, I know that my first one is going to be first name, and the second one is going to be last name like this. So from there, I can do whatever I want with them. For example, first name, last name, just to print it out in the constructor. So anytime you are creating object out of the constructor, as you can see, we are receiving the data that was sent to the, this is the constructor. But how do you receive it in the class? you do it the same the way you normally interact with your function or method. So whatever that is sent to this our constructor here, the first one will go to this, the second one will go to this, the third one, and so forth like that. So, but again, we are still getting undefined here. Even though we are sending this data to the constructor, where are we still getting this undefined? It's because we've not saved this data under the class. We've not really talked to the class that this is our first name and this last name is going to be part of the blueprint. The only thing we are just doing is to supply it as parameter here, and we are just putting it out inside the constructor. But the class doesn't know that this thing is going to be part of the blueprint or the feed or the member variable or the property that you want to have on the blueprint or the class there. So how do we do it? The first way of doing this thing is by using this keyword there. So in order for this thing to work, here we need to talk to the class that this, we want to define a particular first name in you. So we want to define something known as a first name. But where is the value coming from? Value is coming from whatever the user sent from this constructor. But please, looks like they are the same. They are not the same. When you want to set it, you have to use this. You can't just pass this one alone like this. You can't do it like this. It will not work. So in order for it to work, you have to use this keyword. And what is this representing here? This is representing whatever object that you are going to be creating later on. So any object that you create out of this particular class, that's what this is going to represent. So for the first time, when you are creating the user one, this is going to be this object. So the second time, when you are creating the object from it, then this is going to be user two, and so forth like that. So this will always replace whatever the object that you are going to be creating later on. But what we are doing here is that this object that we are creating on it, we are creating this particular feed here or variable. And this feed is taking its value from whatever the user pass here. The name might not be the same thing. Don't forget, this is just parameter. If you like, you can call it X, you can call it Y. It will still work. But the one we want to save on the blueprint or the object that we're going to be creating later on is first name. Where is it getting its value from? It's getting it with whatever you pass to the constructor. The first thing you pass to the constructor, that's what we're going to use for the first name. And the same thing too for this one. We're going to have something known as last name on the object that we'll be creating later on. And the value is going to get there is whatever you pass as the second item here like this. Now, this thing should work as expected because we are now giving to this class the blueprint that we want on the objects that we are going to be creating from it later on. So anytime you are creating object from this class, you want to have the first name and want to have the last name inside that object. But the value of the first name, when this class is constructing the object, is going to be whatever we pass into this constructor, the first one, the first parameter there. So the second parameter we pass there, that's what is going to be assigned to this stuff here. But I'm going to change this one back, or let me rename this one to X too, because error, we are not sending anything again. Now let me comment out this user 2 and run it again. And as you can see now, we are not getting what we are expecting there. Because anytime you are creating or anytime you are instantiating an object from the class, this is what JavaScript is going to use to replace this stuff later on, whatever you have there. And as you can see, it's user 1 that we're using to get full name. So it will only give you all the necessary stuff that you have on user 1, which is something that we can actually console log out, which is going to be this user 1. And once it's console log out, you see that it actually have all this information. So it have the first name and it have the last name on it. And it is of type what? It's of type user here. That's the reason why you always see everything in JavaScript here, or when you console log them out, you only see their type beside it because they are class behind the scene, or all of them are just object, but of which type is of this particular user. So we have this our object, but we are not just creating the object directly, we are getting it from the blueprint that we set up here. And from this blueprint now, we can generate multiple user out of it. So the same way that I'm generating the user 1, can generate user 2, and each one of them are going to have their own copy of the blueprint that we define here. So this is going to be the user 2. Let me send the second name like this. Oh, and this one too we have its own copy of that our get full name. So this user2 then dot get full name, and this one knows that it's supposed to get the name for user2, not user1, because each one of them will generate with this new keyword. It will always create a new object out of the class that you define there. And again too, if I console log out this user2, you see that it will have its own first name and last name, but the data are quite different. So for the first one, we have the first name is Faatihat and the last name is this. And for this second one, we have its own first name to be this and the last name to be what we have there. And as you can see too, it's creating its own, and I can modify anything I want on it and it's still going to work there. So when you are creating your class, you are going to have a constructor. If you don't want to have it, JavaScript will generate it for you. But because the instance of the default one, when you need to construct on solve, when you are generating the object, so you are going to create your own constructor. And how do you create your own constructor in JavaScript? This is what you use. But in some other language, it's still the name of the class that we normally use there. So in some other language, this is how you are going to see the constructor. The same experience you have here is what you carry to other language too, like that. In JavaScript, this is how to create a constructor. In other language, the same name of the class, and at the end of it, you see that the thing is returning something like this, which is a type. Here in JavaScript, you know that we don't have type. When we get to TypeScript later on, talking about type. But for now, JavaScript doesn't care about the type. Loosely type language. You don't need to specify type there. So you have the class, and inside the class, you give it all the functionality that you want, and from there, it's going to do the necessary stuff for you. Now imagine that we need to have the getter and setter. So just like the way we have it inside the object there, we can have the same getter and setter too for our class. So the same way you define inside the objects, that same way too you define them inside class. But don't forget, each object that you are creating out of that class, we have their own copy. They are not using the same. So we have their own copy. So yeah, let me just copy and paste it here. So remove the comment. We can't have comma here because this is not object. This is a class. So we are defining blueprint. And as you can see here, we can use this our getter full name, still get the same thing, or we can set this value after we've constructed the necessary stuff that we need on the object there. So the same getter and setter you used to have on your object, you can have it too inside the class. So now user2, we have its own copy of this getter and setter based on the details that you pass to the constructor. If you need to pass the data, you don't want to pass the data, it's something that you can now use this setter to set the value, or you can use this one to get the value. For example, here now, you can create the user3, which I don't even need to send anything to the constructor because JavaScript is loosely typed. So it will not warn you, or it will not give you any error because you are not sending any data. But assuming in TypeScript now, that one is going to complain because it knows that you mentioned it that inside this constructor, you're expecting two things. Now you are not sending the stuff. Yeah, something concern JavaScript, that you send it or you don't send it, it will still work. So here now I can just call the user, start sending a value. But you know that our first name and last name are going to be undefined based on the experience that you have from the function. When you have a function that needs to receive a parameter and you don't send a parameter, don't forget by default they are going to be undefined. And if you want, you can set default value. So this thing work like normal function or like normal method that you define in your object. Different thing is just that it's special and its name is like this. Not that you'll be using it in this way, have this special name. The way you work with your function or method, that's the same way you work with it. Just that this one will only get called the first time you are creating objects out of the class. That's the only time this one will get called. But for every other one that you want to be using under your object, then you have to define it yourself inside the class. And each object that is going to be created from this your class, we have their own copy of everything that you have inside that here. That one, if it is what you define, and needs to be called on the object. Because later on, we're going to be talking about something known as static. It doesn't belong to the object, but it always belongs to the class. But everything you are having here are not belonging to the class. are going to be transfer or copy into the object later on. So you are defining the structure, you are defining the blueprint or how your object is going to look like. Which object we don't know. So the only time we are going to know the object is when you are using this new keyword and follow by the name of the class. And we have a lot of class in JavaScript already. For example, here now, like this, we have the map. To create a map now, what you do is new map. This map here now, it's our class, and out of that class we are creating what? We are creating a new map out of it, which is the object, and whenever this thing is returning back, then we can do whatever we need to do with it. We don't need to know what is going on behind the scene with this map, but this map now, it will always generate a new copy for us depending on the new keyword that you are using the stuff. And now we are creating our own custom class too, there like that. Out of this user, we are creating this user 3. This is going to be an object, but to not be the same thing as whatever we are getting from this user 1, user 2. All of them we have the same structure but different data, and there's no way user 1 edit will be affecting user 2, or whatever you are doing on user 2 will be affecting user 3. They have the same structure, but they are not the same thing. Just like you and I, we are human beings, but we are not the same thing there. And that's how it works here. And that's what we call it object-oriented programming there, because you are trying to emulate something that happened in real world. So we have a user, we have a blueprint on how things is going to look like. I don't just want to assign it to one person. I want to create a blueprint first. And out of that blueprint, I can start generating multiple items out of it. And that's what we call the objects there. So you define your class, and inside your class, you create all the necessary speech or the method or the member variable and all the thing that you want is your objects that you'll be creating later on to have there like that. And here, this user 3 now can just console log it out. You see that it will still have its own copy of a username. I'll be the first name, last name there, but it will be undefined because we did not send what we need to send into it. As you can see, it's undefined currently here because we did not pass anything to the constructor. If I pass the first one like this, you see that it's only the first name that is going to have value. Second one is not going to have based on the definition that we gave here. So the first thing that is coming in, go to this one. Second one, we go into this one, and so forth like that. But I'm going to change this X to first name so that it makes sense, because you only use a name that is describing what that thing is all about. So like, call it X and Y, nothing concerning JavaScript. Just use them correctly. So that's what JavaScript is all about. But to you, as a developer, whatever name you want to use should always describe what that thing is all about. So that when you're using them later on, or when you come back to your code, you won't start looking for what is X. Why am I using X here? Or why am I using Y? Always good that you name everything that you have in your program there correctly or according to what they are doing there, so that when you are interacting with other developer or when you are sharing your code with other developer, it will not look somehow, or they won't having more time figuring out what you are doing at that place. But through the name, people already know that okay, yeah, now we know where we're dealing with user. Even though what you have inside it might not correlate with that name, but you should always use a name that is describing what you are trying to do there. Since we have our user is going to have first name and last name, that's the reason why we have it there. If I want, I can call this first name X and call this last name Y. Program doesn't care. Your language doesn't care. It will do everything you want it to do. But you as a developer, when you come back to this thing 6 months later on, I'll be looking like, what am I doing here? Why do I use X? Why do I use Y? But through this name now, as when you come back to this program, you will not know what is going on based on the name we are using right now. But the major thing is that you have your blueprint, which is a class, and out of that class, you are creating out the object, or you are instantiating, you are creating an instance. So when you hear the word instance of class, what they are saying there, you are creating object out of that class. As you can see here, you still have all the necessary stuff for this particular object. And again, too, we can use other methods that we define here based on the experience that we have from the last class there. So we can call this user 3. As you can see, we can set our full name here. So when you call it like this, it's going to give you the value, because we are using this our getter and setter there. So if you call it, it knows that it's supposed to call this our getter like that. As you can see, it's called the getter. So when you are dealing with, when you just call it or when you access it like this, what it will do behind the scene is to look for this full name, and it's going to call the getter one, not the set. When is it going to call the set one? The time it's going to call the set one is when you are assigning a value to that particular field. So once you use this assignment operator, it knows that it's supposed to call the setter function for that full name. You call it without using assignment there, then this is the one it's going to call. Don't forget, whatever you are sending down to it, that's what you are going to receive here, and you can do whatever you want with it there. As you can see here, know that whatever the user wants to send should have a space, and that space we use it to split them into two so that we can get the first name and the last name. But you know that it's not everybody that is going to follow this pattern. But since we are using this thing by ourselves, so I'm going to send it use that three data like this. So which means by the time this thing get there, our first name is going to be user3, our last name is going to be data there. And once this thing is called on this line, as you can see, my full name from getter is user3 data, because this one is going to call the set function, while this one is going to call the get function. And this thing is really useful when you don't want to expose how this thing work behind the scene to the user of your function. It might be you that you are working, or you'll be the one that will be creating all this thing for your company later on. Like what I'm doing at work right now. What I'm doing is that all the components that we're using, or all the things that we're using on the page, I'm the one creating it while other developers are using it, because I'm not the only one working it. So we are like three that are working. So my own is to create, while the other one, other developer, is to use. But most of the time when you are creating this thing, you don't want to expose what you are doing out there. The only thing that they need to focus on is how to just create your object out of that class. Once you have whatever you need to have there, then start using all the necessary stuff there. But there's some stuff here that you don't want to expose out. There's some functionality in your class that you don't want to expose out. And that's where this private variable or method comes in. Because there is some time your class, even though it has some of this functionality, it should always be used inside the class, not outside of the class. That's where we have this private variable and this method. But before you started using this private variable and method, I need to show you other way of creating this our feed or variable here. So instead of you doing your feed, or instead of you creating your feed in this way, you can actually define them directly on the class here. So you can actually define them directly on the class. Don't forget, we have first name and last name on our object, but there is still this language and this level here that we need to add to the list add here. So instead of us doing it directly from here, what we can do here is to create this feed. But this one only works, which is supposed to work because we are in 2024. But this thing was added in 2022, and since we are in 2024, almost everybody that is using browser should be using 2024 browser or right from 2022 above. If you use any browser that is below 2022, here it might not work, because it only works just being introduced in 2022. But doing it like this with legacy browser, it will always work. So whether if you do it like this in new browser or the old browser, it will always work. But the one I want to mention here started working in 2022, because that's when it was introduced here into JavaScript. So instead of you defining them here, or instead of you defining your feed here, even if it's the one that they are not sending through the constructor, you can still define them here. For example, here, every user, we are setting their level to 500 by default. Now, if I save this thing and I go back to that place, you see that this user3 is going to have level there too. It's not that users should, or the user of your function, send everything through constructor. You can define them directly here. If you know the default value and the user don't need to send the stuff, you can do it like this. Work. So whether the user have to supply it later on, or you be the one that will set it up. This thing we only set it to 500 when they are creating objects out of that class. When they are instantiating the objects from the class there. But what if you don't want to do it like this, or we want to do it in a modern way, which is the 2022 way there? You can actually define your feed here too. For example, here, like this language. And this is how you define feed in class. This is one of the difference between class and object. But when you are dealing with objects, what you use is column here. When you are dealing with class, when you are setting your feed, from here, what you have to use is assignment. We don't use column. This is not this is not object. This is a class. You are defining blueprint. So here you are creating your feed. What is the value of the feed? So what is the default value that you want to set to it? So now every user, we always have all these property: first name, last name, level, and these languages. But these languages here, we are setting it to this default value. So you must give it a default value. And just do it like and do it like this, but it's not useful to this thing. It's not going to have a value. So you should always set it with a default value. Now, every user that will be created out of this class we always have all these properties. So expand this thing again. As you can see, we have first name, we have languages here, we have last name, and we have level like this. So that's how this thing works. So you can create a feed on your object through this method, or you can define everything here and you set them anytime you want to do it from here like that. So but come here and just say this languages 2 like this is this one. To save, go back to the page, run it, and look at the file. Can you see now? Can you see what it's doing? So it will give you that, because it's now you think you are creating a variable. But in order for this thing to work, you need to move it outside of the constructor. It's going to be here. So, and again, as you can see, I'm not using anything like const or let or whatever stuff, because the class is not going to create them yet. The time it's going to create them is when you are instantiating objects. That's when it's going to do all those magic behind the scene, copy all of them into that object. And whatever object you are creating, each one of them will have their own copy. So user 1 will have his own copy, user 2 will have his own copy, user 3 will have his own copy, and so forth like that. So this is how you can create a member variable or feed. Again, this is how you can create your method using the normal function. When you are creating normal function, this is how to create it, but this is not the only way. You can actually do it like this too when you are dealing with method. This is the one you only see a lot there. This one is the transitional function there. Instead of you using this method there, you can actually use this other method to get full name like this, and you set it equal to. Please, we don't use column here. When you are dealing with class, that's when you'll be using column. When you are dealing with object, that's when you'll be using column. When we are dealing with class, anything you are assigning to feed, you always use this assignment operator. And what did I want to do? I want to assign it to function, which is not doing anything right now. So this is another way. But as you can see, this method on line 67 is more compact compared to what we have on this line 71 here. You can do it like this, which is what you always use, or you can do it like this. This is another way. Or when you are dealing with arrow function, so arrow function follow this method here. So let me create another one again. It's going to be this get full name 3 like this. You know arrow function, there's no keyword function there. What you have is something like this. You don't have to. This is how. So for the arrow function, this is how it looks like. You want to do your normal function, you can do it like this. But this is the method. It's more preferable there because it's short compared to this one that you have to type the full stuff before you do the same thing. So I can just create the name, just put the bracket or bracket and the curly brace there, and it will start working. So you can create your method using this method. This method, when you are dealing, these two are dealing with normal function, while this last one dealing with the arrow function there like that. All of them work. So to create feed in class, you do it like this, or you do it like this. So if you still want to assign all this one to this constructor, you can do it. So this is how you are going to do it. You need to change any one of them in the constructor. You have to use this keyword beside them. And as you can see, it knows that we have languages, and it knows that we have these languages too, like that. So when you want to change them in this constructor, you have to do it like this. You can't just type them alone like this. No, you must use this because it will be created on the particular object that you are going to be instantiating from this class. When you want to use any one of them that you define outside of the constructor, you still need to use this, or you can just do them directly from here. But you might be thinking, why do we need to do it outside here? Because with this method, you can create something known as this private variable or this private method. What are private variables or what are private methods? These are variable or methods that you don't want them to be visible outside of the class. So which means you can't call them directly on the object that you are creating here. So anytime you create an object, anything that is private will only be used or it will only be available inside the class. You can only use them inside the class, but you can't use them outside when you started creating your object. This object now will not have access to the anything that is private. And what I mean by will not have access, will not have access means you cannot use them outside here. Can always use them. As you can see that it's showing everything. You can use any one of them outside of this place. You can modify them. But there is some functionality you want to have in your class that you don't want the object to do or to manipulate them outside here. They should come through the interface. And what I mean by interface, which is going to be like a method to update something there or to change that value. You don't want the user to just, or the user of your function, just change anything anyhow like this. So the only time they can be changed is through or inside the class. So it's only the method of the class or the method that you define inside the class that can change them. But you do not have access to them outside of that class. And that's where the private comes in. And how do you create a private? Create a private, where people used to do it before 2022 there, is by creating this underscore, but this one is not in JavaScript. This is just a convention by developer. So anytime you see this underscore in your class there, that thing is telling you that it's not something that is supposed to use outside when you created your object. That thing is only meant for internal usage. You are not supposed to be using it outside here. That doesn't mean you cannot modify it. You modify it, but it can cause some things you don't want because you don't know how that class the class work behind the scene, and you started modifying some stuff on it that have underscore. It can cause a problem. So by convention, before the 2022 there, the way we do it is like something like this, where you are going to create a variable of all right. So let me continue. So when you have something like this, maybe you are working with a code later on, or you are working with other developer, you are working with a library, and you see something like this there, just know that code has been created before the 2022 release of the class there, the private variable this way. And this one now is just a normal feed. This feed, I can call it anything that I want. So here, private. All of them will still have access to it. And at the same time, too, can modify it outside of the class. Now, save this in. Open it, as you can see, is part of them. But here, anytime you see something like this in whatever code that you are using in your program there, they are trying to tell you that this thing is not something you're supposed to interacting with outside of that class. But and change it if you want. If you want, then you can just say user 3, and I have access to that private. If you want, I can just modify it, change it to anything else. You know, this thing can blow up a class that you are using based on whatever that thing is doing there. And as you can see, it has been changed something else. It's something that you are not supposed to touch. This is how you do it. And as you can see that the JavaScript is not warning or is not giving you any error. That's the reason why the private variable or method are now introduced. Because some people will not even know that they are not supposed to modify this thing. So some people will still change it if you want. JavaScript will not complain to update it because it's not part of JavaScript. Just developers that come together and give this convention of using underscore to represent something that is private to the class that shouldn't be used outside of the class. JavaScript is not enforcing it. But how do we use the one that the JavaScript is enforcing there? That's where this true private comes in. So anything that you see, any member variable or any feed that you see that is starting with this hash, this thing to only work in class. So if you use it outside of the class, not do what you're expecting it to do. So now we can have a true private feed like this feed now is private to this class. So you can only change it inside the class. It's only the method that you have inside the class can change it. Any other thing outside of the class. So outside of the class, this is what I'm calling outside of the class. when you are creating the object out of that class. Now you are outside of the class because it will create the object for you. The object now can modify this variable. You will not even have access to it. Now, if you come down now and try to use this user 3, you just use your dot so that it brings out everything out. As you can see, it's not part of the list. So anytime you want your variable be private to the objects have it, they have it, but you can't use it outside of the class. That's the only problem. They will still have it, but you can't use them outside of the class. And that's why you see that it's gray out in VS Code. Here now VS Code is telling us that, see, yeah, so it's part of the variable and I've not used it, so you cannot modify it outside of the class. It's part of the object, but you can't modify it outside. The only time you can modify it is through the class. So you have to have a method here that can interact with this thing here. The method, as you can see, is there. It will be there, but you can't work with it. It's private. And if you try to type the stuff, you get error because it's not going to show outside. You can't do anything like this outside JavaScript. Only work in class. So here now, if you use this through private it like this, like that, as you can see, it's to complain because it doesn't know what you are doing. This is a syntax error outside of the class. You can only use it inside. But we want to modify it because currently now, what is the value there? The value we have there is this particular value, which is empty value. But I want to update it. So what can we do? What we can do here is to create a method that can, which is what we call interface now. That's what we normally call interface. You are creating an interface or you are creating a bridge between your private and a public user. So here now we have something that is private, but you want to create a bridge that can update value. But the user of this your class can't just update the stuff outside of it. You have to come through the bridge. And you know that you can do anything you want with that bridge. The bridge can just be your normal setup function, or it can be your normal function that you want to create there. So for example here now, what we want to do is update private like this. So anytime you call this method outside, it's going to receive whatever the value that we need to pass into it, and it's going to process it. And once it's done processing the value, then that's when it's now going to set it here. And see what I mentioned, it's going to process first by checking it. And once it's check the stuff first, that's when it's now going to update the value. Not that you just update the value directly. This one is the bridge where it's going to receive the value and do transform. For example, now maybe you have a function that can update the user password. You don't want the user password to be visible outside. You don't just want anybody to just see the password outside, like to just modify it anyhow. It should come through a bridge. And this bridge now, your password, you don't save, like when you are dealing with backend code, we don't save password directly in the database. Whatever password you type, you convert it to all this gibberish that you cannot convert it back again. Once the thing is converted to this gibberish, it's not something that you can reverse. And what you type in your password is, maybe you type testing123. But what is going to be saved inside database is just some gibberish text, because we don't save the normal stuff that you type. So the same thing too now, we don't want the user to just modify this their password. For example here now, I want to have this password, but this password is nothing yet, but users should not be able to change it. Before you can change it, you have to come through this interface. And once this interface receive it, what is it going to do? What it's going to do is that it's going to firstly convert it. For example here, it's going to encode it. To encode data here, it's going to be this B to A. What is it? Pass the value. That's when they get the encoded data. Or let me type encoded data. When we get the encoded data, what do we now need to do? So this dot password. As you can see, anything that is inside class, we have access to it. But outside of the class, you can't do anything with it. So now this password now, what do we want to do? We want to set it to this our encoded data. So now we have this interface that you can use to communicate with the password. But outside of it, you can't just change it anyhow, because there is something we need to do first. We need to firstly convert this whatever data you send to us into this gibberish text, and that text is what we now save as your password here, like that. And we can create a method too that confirm whether your password is right or wrong, and so forth like that. Now I will just leave this one, and as you can see, We have the password, which is nothing right now. But now I can update this user3 by saying update private like this, or update password, or whatever you want to call it. What I want to call my password, testing pass like this. Testing pass like this, and save it. And from there now, if you go there, can you see what is not saving? This is what I type, testing pass. What I'm actually saving inside the stuff is just this gibberish text here. Because you don't save the normal password that you type. What we save is some random text later on that we can compare. So we have to, when we want to compare the value, whatever the user sent to you, you convert it and you now check it against what you have in your database. If they are the same thing, then it means the user supply correct password. But if they are not the same thing, then it means the user supply wrong password. Because this thing will always convert this thing for you every time. So if I copy it from here, just copy the same text, come to this code, I can use the same B to A here to pass it into the stuff there and press enter. And as you can see, I'm still getting the same thing. So whatever text you pass, no matter the time you call it, you always get back the same result. So like that. Then we can use it now to create a method that compare their password to. Here now, we can just say compare password. What do we need to do? They need to supply the password there. Again, they use our B to A again. So const encoded data like this is going to be B to A, which can cause error. That's why we'll be talking about error later on. This thing can cause error, supply nonsense to it. So, but for now, I'll be supplying correct stuff. This should be encoded how many dead to encoded data. So how do we do now? So what we just need to do, return and this dot password. So if it's whatever we said in the password is matching this encoded new data that we have. If your password is right, something is wrong here. Not value password. So save. Now we can come down here. After we've updated our password, we can now compare their password to check whether it is okay or not. So compare password now. What I want to pass here is just going to be testing. You know, this thing will either return true or false. So we console log out the stuff and save now. Go back, as you can see, we have false. Since you have false, you know that the user is supplying wrong details. So later time it will work is when you supply the same thing as what you use to create your password. This is just like basic stuff that happen behind the scene in the back end there. But now you can actually create a class for the user and you put all the functionality that is dealing with user. So anytime any user is registering in our database, what we just do is to create a copy of that class. And the class now, we can start asking some question about it. This is for the user 3. The same thing too can happen for user 2, but it's going to be a different data entirely because they are not the same user. And as you can see now, it's returning true because I'm sending the same thing. And based on that now, if the backend sees it, then the next thing, it will generate a token. There too, they will have another class that do with all this functionality. So class token generator like this, or token utilities, or whatever name you want to call your class, and so forth like that. That's how things work. Group the related stuff that you want to be generating object out of it later on. And it's not every time that you generate object. Some them they are just utilities, just like what I'm calling this one. These utilities, you're not going to be generating object out of them. What you just do is to call the method directly on the object. How can you do that? That's where the static variables and method are going to come in later on there. For now, you can have your private variable and at the same time you can have private method. So when are you going to have private method? How can you create private method? Same thing here, to just add the hash before the name of the private. So this now is going to be a private method. You can use this method only inside this class. You cannot use it outside this class. This private method now, instead of us, as you can see, I'm doing the same thing here. This encoded data here is the same thing that I'm doing on this line. So I can just create a function or the method that will be doing this thing for me. But you know that this functionality, I don't need it outside of the class. So this encoded whatever stuff, nothing concerning the user about this functionality. So it's only happening inside the class. It's not happening outside. So now I can just create a private method that will be doing this magic and it will return the data back to me. Now here, now instead of passing this one, I'll just put it here. Just give it the value that you want, and its own job is just to return. Here now, it's just going to return this stuff here. Going to return whatever you do here. Now we can now call this private method here. This dot private method, and don't forget you need to supply the value. Same thing here too. Copy this line and paste it in this place. Now, nothing concerned about this, each one of these stuff here. In case the functionality of the way you are generating your token, or the way you are generating, or the way you are encoding stuff change later on, the only thing you just update is this line. Wherever you are using it, you don't need to go there again. Add there like that. But this method now, we are only using inside this class. Why do we need to expose it to the user? No, you don't need to expose it. And that's the reason why this one is private. And here now, outside now, you can't just come here and say you want to use user 3 like this. It will not work. And not, as you can see, you will not have access to it because it's private. Now, if I remove this thing from it, you see that they will have access to it, which means now they can start doing some stuff. But not to concern them about this private method. They are not supposed to be calling this thing outside. It's only useful inside here for us to generate or to encode this our password. There is nothing need for anytime you create the object out of the class, you are not supposed to be doing it. We have created a bridge for them. Bridge is this. Once you call this bridge, and that's the one that is going to do that magic behind the scene. Nothing concerned about the user, how these things are being encoded, or how you are doing the checking. Their own is to just receive the bridge that they are going to use to communicate with the system or with the objects or with the class behind the scene there. So we are not supposed to be calling this. Now we need to convert it back to private. This is what we call private method. What's wrong with so what we need to do here is to just have the private method here. So there's nothing concerning about this outside. You cannot do something like this outside. Then you can't do like this. It will not work because the name are not the same. Come back here now and check. You see that it will tell us that what we are doing here now doesn't know about it at all. As you can see here, uncut reference password. Okay, it's strong. What did I do? Where's the yeah? Should be now save it, and as you can see here now, user private method is not a function because that's not the way the name is. The name is starting with hash, and again too outside here you cannot use hash because it's not a valid JavaScript code. Outside of the class, hash like this is not a valid code. Only work inside the class. So this is how to create a private method. This is how to create a private vid variable. And these variables are useful anytime you want to have some functionality that doesn't need to be exposed to the object. The object will still have them, but you cannot use it outside of the class. That's just it. They will be there, but they are not going to be used outside of the class. They are only meant for the internal usage. So where you are doing all the other magic, you can have them just like this one now. This functionality, I'm using it here, I'm using it here. And it's something that can take a lot of line, or it's something that I might need to change later on. So I don't need to start going to different line where they are being used. This is the only thing I will change, and the thing will just start working. For example, here now, I can just return back the value. Maybe we are changing the functionality. Later on now, the way it's being used, I don't need to change it, but everything will still start working because see the password is just whatever I pass back to this. That's not what I want. Yeah, I always want this thing to convert it to this gibberish text. But this conversion is something you can reverse. This type of conversion I'm doing here is something that is reversible. When you want to convert, you use B to A. Normally use this thing a lot when I'm dealing with URL. You used to see something like that too in Unilearning site at the top. The data thing is really useful when you need to pass data around through the URL, and that's what you only see inside the query parameter. When you see Q and you see some gibberish text here, what they are doing is that they just encode the data, and now whenever you go to that page, the page is now going to decode whatever that is there. I mean, in JavaScript, I can use B to A to encode. For example, here now, I can pass object into it. Not anything, but that thing have to be string. Whatever you want to pass. For example, here, I have the data, which is like this one here. This is the data that I want to put in the URL. But I don't want to put it like this because this is object. I don't want it to be like this. So what I can do, convert this my data to JSON. So because the data string like this is just going to be JSON, which is what you can use to convert any JavaScript code into string there. So we can stringify our data here. Once we do this, now data string just going to be, but this one too, I don't want to put in the URL directly like that. I want to convert it to something that the user will not even understand what is going on there. But the page should be able to code the data later on. Now we can now use our B2A. So now we can have our encoded data like this, which is going to be this B2A like this, B2A. Then what is the data? Data string. Or you can pass it to a string. If you pass anything it doesn't understand, generate error from you for you like that. Now we have access to this our encoded data. Now this is the data. We pass it into our URL. The URL, what do we want to have there? So Q is going to be this. And once the page sees it later on, we should be able to decode the data. It's something you can do too. To decode the data is just to reverse the stuff. To encode the data, you use B to A. But to decode the data, you use A to B. Just change the letter like that. And whatever you pass into it, it's going to decode it for you. You cannot pass wrong stuff. If you pass wrong thing that was not decoded, like it was not encoded there, you get error. For example, here now, I had some random text of like that. It's going to be giving me, but it's seeing it as a valid stuff. But let me pass something not seeing it as you can see now. So it will fail. Something that can cause error. I'm going to be handling that one with this error handling later on, because you don't know whether the user have modified this thing. Modify the stuff, be able to handle the error, not that site or application is going to stop. Reverse the stuff. Now you get the data back, and once you get the data, pass it again because this is a JSON data. Pass it again. There, display the necessary data, user page, like that. This is where I'm going to stop. And in our next class now, we're going to be talking about this static variable and method, inheritance here, and from there, talk about this set and map, because they are just class that JavaScript is giving us to do some stuff. But this one works like object, this one works like array. The difference between them is that for set doesn't permit duplicate data. Why this one is really useful when you are dealing with a large data set. You need to be able to access from, so it works like object, but object there, when you need to frequently ask object for whether it have a particular value or not, it used to take time when you are dealing with a large data set. When you're dealing with a small data set, don't use map, always go with object. When you're dealing with small data, maybe your user list is like 10, is 20, 200, 300, 400. But when you started entering something like 1 million data set like that, you need to keep checking whether a particular user is there or not. Map is always the best one. When you're dealing with a small data set, you always go with object. If you know you are dealing with a large data set, map is really useful for quickly checking whether it have a particular value or not. And another thing with map is that you can use anything for key. So for the object, you can only use string for the map, you can use anything for key. We're going to see all of them in the next class there. After we talked about the static variable, we brush all this one because major thing is what we've talked about, but inheritance is very important because one class can inherit property from other class there. And that's why you see that everything in JavaScript, you look at the end of everything, you always see that they are coming from object. All of them are inheriting a lot of property from object. How do you create something like this? When you have one class which is inheriting the other class. For example, here you have your profile, or you are creating an application for your site there, and you have a profile. But this profile is just for all the user. Like where, and on your site you have admin, you have staff, you have admin, or when you're thinking of it in a school perspective, like Unilearning now, the school portal are different type of user there. You have students, you have staff, and you even have admin. All of them we have profile. So here we have a class, well, but all the other one now can now extend or can copy some stuff from the profile. Here too, I want to have another class for staff. This staff is going to have all the property that is coming from this. Here too, we're going to have class for students. Same thing to this student, we have the profile, because you don't want this thing that is here, you don't want to duplicate it here and here. You want to have it in its own class, but each one of them should have the copy. So you can now the staff can extend profile, then to extend at the same time the admin who are managing the site, updating the stuff there too. You have the like that. So two, we have the class for them. And the three of them, we have a profile. Because every staff we have name, we have other thing that's related to profile. But there's some stuff that is for staff only, like salary and so forth like that. That doesn't consider less salary. So that one will be only be defined inside staff. Again, too for students, so they have the course they are offering for them. Why staff, they have the course that they are teaching. So they are not the same. So the way you work here, from this. But all of them have something in common, which is the profile, name, your address, and so forth like that. All those things that are common will be here. Now, all these three stuff, the class here, and then come here and extend it. That's like the name, extend. So you add more features, but you are still having the profile details. That's where the inheritance comes in. Why polymorphism here is like the extended class or the base. This is what we call base class. That means the parent class. So these are different names. I call it base class. You see the other people calling it parent class, like that. So the base class, all these child class here are going to be inheriting something from it. What they are inheriting, some of the method they are inheriting from it, they can customize it, or the stuff can work in different way based on where you are using it. So this one here, you have where you are printing the name, but the staff can use and print their own name in a different way. Student will print their own in a different way. This one too will print its own name different way. All of them, they are inheriting the stuff. They are inheriting it from here, but it's behaving differently for each one of them. That's what we call poly. Poly means this same thing can behave in different way. Like it can have different form, like that. So we're going to be talking about all this one. We'll just quickly brief on this set and map and all this error handling. After that, we should be able to talk about recursion function in JavaScript. It's another very important topic and its fans are there. When you want to do some stuff, function should be able to call itself. Or we should talk about, again too, we need to talk about calling JavaScript. So those are advanced stuff that you always use in some rare case that will save you a lot of typing of too much of code. It's just small code, but it's going to do a lot of work for you. We start with the static variable and method in the next class and talk about inheritance. Send them out for now. I'm going to use them next class. There's any question?
No, I don't have a question for now, sir.
All right, so let me quickly save this in because this video recording stuff that I'm using now size used to, hey, it's going to